Gemar Hatzima Tova. I wanted to open my remarks before Yizkor by sharing a few months ago. Roseanne showed me this video we watched together. There was a pregnant woman sitting on a bus bench and an elderly man holding a cane sitting a bit to her left. The woman looked tired and stressed out. The elderly man looked at her and asked, "Are you all right?" And the woman simply said, "Yes." Then the elderly man follows with, "How far along are you?" The woman does a double take. Facial expression shows shock and says to the elderly man, "What?" The old man, concerned, perhaps thinking you should probably never ask this question, begins to stumble through an apology, yet still looking at the woman's expanded belly. He says to her, "I'm sorry, I was just wondering how, I'm sorry." The woman looks at the elderly man for a bit and then quietly says, "I'll be 21 weeks on Tuesday." The elderly man appears very relieved. He smiles at the expectant mother, and then he says, "Not long to go." The woman sarcastically replies, "Easy for you to say." The old man, taking her in a bit more, inquires, "Are you finding it tough?" She nods yes. He continues, "You're excited for the baby, right?" She nods her agreement. But then she says, "I'm scared." The elderly man leans towards her and asks, "What's scaring you?" And she responds with a gulp, "Everything." The elderly man reaches for her hand. He wants to assure her and says, "I'm sure you'll be fine." The woman looks at him and responds, "People say that, but what if I'm not?" The old man says, "But you'll manage. Everybody does." She retorts, "Do they?" He asks of her, "What about your family?" And she answers, "It's complicated." He questions her, "You don't get on?" And then she explains, "It's just me and my dad, and he's sick." The elderly man pats her hand again and says, "It'll be okay." And then he stares across the empty street. A few moments later, the bus pulls up, the woman gets up, she takes a couple of steps. She then abruptly turns around, puts out her hand to the elderly man and says, "Come on, Dad. This is our bus. Come on." The elderly man looks briefly bewildered. Then he takes his daughter's hand, allowing her to help him onto the bus. I watched this video with Roseanne and thought about Yizkor, about the complexities of memory, what we remember and what we forget. There's a midrash taught that before God created human beings, God wanted to create memory and forgetfulness. But the angels objected. The angel of song said, "Don't create forgetfulness. People will forget the songs of their ancestors." The angel of story said, "If you create forgetfulness, human beings will forget so many good stories." The angel of name said, "Forget songs, forget stories. Human beings won't even remember each other's names." God listened to all the angels' complaints. And then God asked them what they remembered. The angels said to God they remembered how it was before the world was formed. Then they spoke of time before time existed. Then they recalled when they disagreed with one another. And then they remembered their disagreements and revived those arguments. And they began to loudly yell at one another until the heavens roared and God said, "Forget forget. And then there was forgetfulness. Immediately, the angels forgot their anger at each other. Their voices became peaceful. And God saw that it was good. And God said, there are some things people will need to forget. The angels said again, people will forget what they ought to remember. But God said, I will remember the important things. I will plant the seeds of remembrance in the soul of my people. The rabbis are teaching with this midrash and reflection of Yizkor, memory, remembrance, because they understood that memory, remembrance can be wonderful and it can be difficult. And it can be everything in between. Yizkor can generate a sea of images. We listen for the echoes of past feelings. Sometimes we choose what we want to remember and what we want to forget. And sometimes we don't have the choice. At Yizkor, I feel all of this, and this year I feel it even more powerfully. It's my first Yizkor, my Yizkor observance as an adult orphan. My father passing 10 months ago, my mother 6.5 years ago. Within the complexities of my memories, I choose to be like the pregnant woman, getting up from the bus bench, reaching out to the father who forgot who she was. She carried hurt, and she carried love. And she reached out not to leave her father behind. Memory connects us to each other, past, present, and future. It can be easy. It can be hard. Our Judaism teaches us during Yizkor to pull on the invisible, unbreakable threads of love. Remember the good, that it may live on in us in words, gestures, a smile, an act of kindness. And allow yourself to gently move away from those threads that don't prompt our thanksgiving. Yizkor is our time to value the blessings, the memories that can send echoes and reverberations, that which we want to pass along to those we love. Memory is necessary to our identities as human beings, and particularly to our lives as Jews. Jonathan Safran Foer wrote, Jews have 6 senses: touch, taste, sight, smell, hearing, and memory. He writes, the Jew is pricked by a pin and remembers other pins. It is only by tracing the pinprick back to the other pinpricks when his mother tried to fix his sleeve while his arm was still in it, when Abraham tested the knife point to be sure Isaac would feel no pain, that the Jew is able to know why it hurts. When a Jew encounters a pin, he asks, what does it remember like? Memory is the 6th sense of the Jew. Memory is necessary, yet it is far from perfect. And what Yizkor also prompts within us is the fear, like the elderly man with his cane who didn't know his own daughter, what happens when memory erodes? What echoes and reverberations will be felt by our children and our children's children? Within my family, a daughter lives far away from her aging father. She had to return to her father's home and assist with his move to a memory care unit. Leaving him, she thought to write her father letters that he could receive and reread if he wanted. The first letter delighted her father, so she kept writing. Unfortunately, a few months later, the father couldn't remember receiving any letters or reading any letters. In the father's room, the letters are neatly stacked on top of a bag of old newspapers. Sometimes the father touches the newspapers as if the past can be relearned. But that's as far as it goes. At best, they are merely a reminder of what the father once thought he still had, a type of prop of wishful thinking. The memories are falling away into dust. And while the sorrow about this memory loss situation impacts the aging parent, the daughter, for a longer time and differently, will live with the sorrow and the slow losses. What does the daughter choose to do? What can be her personal Yizkor? She stopped writing letters to her father and instead wrote letters to herself. Sometimes she writes to her present self. Sometimes they are letters to her future self. The daughter also stacks the letters and has told her children that they are there for them to be read someday. Yizkor is remembering the past, the present, and also considering the future. Yehuda Amichai wrote a poem entitled Letter. Amichai describes how home and memories and our own journey all interconnect. He writes, "To live is to build a ship and a harbor at the same time, and to complete the harbor long after the ship has sunk. And at the finish, one remembers only that there was mist. Yet whoever remembers only mist, what do they remember?" Literally, the word remember means bringing to mind. When we write or receive a letter or think about home or a loved one, we bring to our mind the people and places that shaped us. During these high holy days when we're taking stock and thinking about changes of who we want to become with the gift of another year, it's fitting to think about our memories, whether it be easy, hard, or in between. All of us have had our lives touched by pain, loss, love, and mortality. Sometimes our troubles in life are illness, addiction, betrayal, dementia, anger, even violence. No one avoids negative experiences. But within our lives, we have to build harbors and sail ships simultaneously. We try to live our moments and appreciate the living of them. And we take our memories as best as we can, and we try to feel the best of the treasured moments. We also try to think how best we might write the letters our children and children's children will read. Joan Baez shared in some lyrics she wrote about her relationship with Bob Dylan. She wrote, we both know what memories can bring. They bring diamonds and rust. With the passage of time, we can choose how to code our memories. We can choose to take hold of the diamonds and just live with the rust. Many people know of the show This Is Us. How many watched it? Anyone? A few. Be familiar to you. One of the topics of the show tackled difficult subject of Alzheimer's. And an original song was written for this show called the Forever Now. And the lyrics capture the importance of our truly living within our moments, all the more so when we know that memory may not be around. Just to share some of the lyrics, the years can be counted in seconds. That's fine with me, because I get this moment with you forever now. If all hits me at once, forever now. If there's a right way to say it, I'm still learning how. Maybe all that we have is a forever now. As we enter our Yizkor observance and think on our forever now, let me end with a final story. It may be familiar to you. It's entitled The Cab Ride. I drove a cab for a living. Once, when I arrived at 2:30 a.m., the building was dark except for a single light in the ground floor window. Under these circumstances, many drivers would just honk once or twice, wait a minute, and then drive away. This passenger might be someone who needs my assistance. I reasoned to myself. So I walked to the door and knocked. "Just a minute," answered a frail, elderly voice. After a long pause, the door opened. A small woman in her 80s stood before me. By her side was a small nylon suitcase. The apartment looked as if no one had lived in it for years. She said, "Would you carry my bag out to the car?" I took the suitcase to the cab, then returned to assist the woman. She took my arm, and we walked slowly towards the curb. When we got in the cab, she gave me an address, then asked, "Could you drive through downtown?" I answered quickly, "It's not the shortest way." "Oh, I don't mind," she said. "I'm in no hurry. I'm on my way to a hospice." I looked in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were glistening. She continued, "I don't have any family left. The doctor says I don't have very long." I quietly reached over and shut off the meter. I asked, "What route would you like me to take?" For the next 2 hours, we drove through the city. She showed me the building where she had once worked as an elevator operator. We drove through the neighborhood where she and her husband had lived when they were newlyweds. Sometimes she'd ask me to slow in front of a particular building or corner and would sit staring into the darkness, saying nothing. As the first hint of sun was creasing on the horizon, she suddenly said, "I'm tired. Let's go now." We drove in silence to the address she had given me. It was a low building like a small convalescent home. 2 orderlies came out to the cab as soon as we pulled up. I opened the trunk, took the small suitcase to the door. The woman was already seated in a wheelchair. Almost without thinking, I bent and gave her a hug. She held onto me tightly. She said, "You gave an old woman a little moment of joy." I didn't pick up any more passengers that shift. I drove aimlessly, lost in thought. For the rest of the day, I could hardly talk. What if I had refused to take the run or had honked once and then driven away? On a quick review, I don't think that I've done anything more important in my life. With Yizkor, let us choose to recall the experiences that we cherish. A grandparent's love, a parent's embrace, the imagined worlds created with siblings, the look of love you get from the one you love, the sound of a good friend's laugh, the feeling of loving your child, and so much more. Now with our Yizkor service, we can get up from our bus bench. We can reach out to the ones we love. We can choose what we shall remember. We can choose what we shall forget. Let's live our forever now and travel in the cab that in this moment is the most important time in our life.